on to our next presentation about how to streamline SAP Fiori app development using SAP Fiori tools. Yes, you can create powerful apps with minimal coding. To show you how this works, please welcome our next speakers, Ian Quigley and Stefanie Hager. Ian is the product owner for SAP Fiori tools, and Stefanie's key role is product manager for SAP Fiori Elements and SAP Fiori tools. So Ian and Stefanie, over to you.
Thank you, Gunther, and thanks a lot for the warm welcome. I'm super happy to be here today together with Ian, because Ian is going to give you a really great demo of Fiori tools in just a few minutes. And let's take a quick look at what we're going to cover today. So I'll start with a really quick and crisp introduction, keeping in mind that I'm talking to an expert community. Then Ian will show you how to migrate an SAP Fiori project from Web IDE to SAP Fiori tools. He'll enhance the app and he'll show you some really cool SAP Fiori tools capabilities. And finally, he will also deploy it. Then it's back over to me for a sneak peek on the low-code stuff that we've been working on. You already got a glimpse of that in the keynote by Katja. And we promise to do our very best to make sure you keep 5 minutes for questions and maybe make up for some of that time that we've already overrun. But anyhow, there's the Q&A part, so please keep asking. All right, you already heard from Katja that we are trying really hard to keep improving our tools and just to make your lives easier. And at the same time, we at SAP really also have the need to scale our development of Fiori apps, especially at S/4HANA. So a lot's been happening on the tools front, and that is what we're going to show you today. Most of you will know SAP Fiori tools is available on 2 platforms. If you like to work with our pre-configured, ready-to-rock SAP Business Application Studio, you find SAP Fiori tools pre-installed in the SAP Fiori and in the full-stack cloud application dev spaces. But of course, they're also available as free extensions in Visual Studio Code. And we often get the question if there's any differences between the 2 versions. Well, there's almost none. And if there are, this is due to the difference of the IDEs or of hosted versus local environment. For example, for BAS, you maintain destinations in the SAP Business Technology Platform cockpit. And in Visual Studio Code, Fiori tools now offers the ability to save connection information to the secure storage. But other than that, features and function scope is very much the same. SAP Fiori tools aims to guide you through the full app development cycle and will showcase all of these modules except for guided development, as you've already seen this in the keynote. Quick round robin. The application generator creates the project in a standardized way and using a wizard style approach. The application modeler visualizes the structure of the app and it allows you to configure it without coding. And this is also where we want to introduce more low-code capabilities. Then there's the service modeler, which visualizes the service entities and their relations. And it also allows you to easily transition backend annotations into your local project. Well, that's not really relevant for CUP, but it's very useful for ABAP backends. Okay, if you've already used Fiori tools, I'm sure you really like our annotation LSP, which gives you code completion for both XML and CAP CDS annotations, as well as built-in validation, quick fixes, and quite a bit more. Then there's the guided development, which is again a wizard approach, step-by-step guides. And this time, these wizards will generate code snippets that can be injected automatically into the right places, in the right files in your project. So while at first maybe we thought this is more for not so experienced developers, we actually got the feedback that in quite a few cases, it can make you faster, even if you are a very experienced developer. So do give it a try. And then, of course, you can always check the changes that you're making in the auto refresh enabled preview, either with mock or with live data. Now, what I haven't talked about are migration and deployment capabilities, and this is because Ian will cover these steps in greater depth. And with this, over to you, Ian.
Thanks, Stephanie. So, morning, everyone. Nice to meet you. My name is Ian Quigley. I'm one of the product owners, as mentioned, on the SAP Fiori tool suite. So today, I'd like to show you some of the Fiori tools, and as part of that Fiori tool suite, we provide the ability to migrate existing SAP Fiori applications. So perhaps you have an application you developed a number of months or years ago, again, perhaps on Web IDE, and you want to migrate it so that it can support all our tooling. So I'll start off by migrating an older project. Then hopefully I can enhance it by running through some of the tools that Stephanie alluded to in the last slide to enhance the application as easily as possible. And then all going well, I should be able to add deployment configuration to that application and finally deploy it to a development landscape. Okay, so just briefly to detail what migration is in terms of the SAP Fiori tool suite. So we provide a tool that allows you to migrate an existing application that wasn't developed with our tools. It wasn't using our SAP Fiori application generator, but you now want to use that Fiori application and take advantage of those tools. So the migration tool is delivered as part of our tool suite, and it supports either VS Code or the SAP Business Application Studio. And it supports helping to migrate your projects by firstly auto-detecting any projects you have in your workspace that it feels are suitable for migration to the SAP Fiori tool suite. This migration auto detection supports both SAP Fiori Elements and SAP UI5 Freestyle projects. We have just recently introduced the ability to migrate multiple projects simultaneously. So for example, if you clone a number of projects in one go, the migration tool will detect them all and allow you to migrate them in one fell swoop, as opposed to having to do them individually. We do have some stipulations. We do some checks and balances on the workspace to detect if the project is a Fiori project and if it does support or if it can support our tooling. So for example, the project must have a package JSON or a pom.xml in the case of a Maven project. And also there must be a data source specified in the manifest.json in order for it to be detected for migration. Okay, so that's it. So I think it's best now maybe if I switch over and share my screen and demo those in action. Okay, so hopefully you can see my screen here, and what I'm showing now is just, I guess, an older project in Web IDE. So this is a Fiori Elements project. It's a list report and an object page for a V2O data source developed in Web IDE, and this project is now committed to GitHub. So in order to see the migration, I'll start by cloning this into VS Code. So I'm going to switch to VS Code. I have a blank workspace, nothing in it. I'll start by cloning that project. And once I successfully clone it, the migration tool kicks in. It detects that I have a Fiori project, and it asks me, do I want to migrate that project so that it can support our tooling? So I have three options. I can cancel, and it should ask me again if I make changes to that folder in the future. I can choose don't ask again, and in that case, it will ignore that folder going forward and not continually try and prompt you to ask you if you want to migrate, or I can actually start the migration. So let's start migrating this project, and I get a web view in VS Code. And again, this also supports Business Application Studio with the list of projects that the migration tool has identified in my workspace that it feels are valid to be migrated to support our tooling. And in this case, there's only one because I just cloned one project. Let's choose it. And the only thing I need to do is choose the backend system that this project should reference. I guess because this project came from Web IDE, it would have been referencing a destination. So in order for it to work in VS Code, we need to convert that into a backend system that we can access and view within our local environment. If I was in Business Application Studio, I would have the ability to choose destinations from that landscape also. Okay. So when I choose an SAP system, I can either manually input the host name of the client, or if I already have saved systems from using the Fiori tools previously, I can choose one of those. So for example, if I have already used the Fiori application generator and saved a system as part of generation, I will see that saved system in this drop down here. So in this case, I'm going to choose SH4. It populates the host name associated with that system and the client, and now I can start migration. So when I start migration, it updates a number of files, and it also kicks off a new npm build because we have some new tools and libraries added as part of migration. So what I might do is quickly show you the changes that have been made so far. Because I'm in under source control, I can see the changes that I've made, and I can see what the migration tool has added to my project. So first of all, we include a git ignore file, and that git ignore file includes just some build artifacts and folders that shouldn't be under source control. The package lock.json file, I'm not going to show you because that just gets deleted and regenerated based on the package JSON changes we provide. So in the package.json, we remove the build scripts associated with Web IDE and the dependencies, and we add our own dependencies support our SAP Fiori tooling, and one runtime dependency that supports proxying our backend, which I'll talk about in more detail in a bit. And also we include scripts to support preview of your application locally with a number of different parameters, as well as adding deployment configuration and deploying your application remotely. Okay. We add a file called UI5 local.yaml, and this allows our developers to work completely in an offline environment. So rather than connecting to a UI5 CDN during preview, we actually download a version of UI5 locally into your project the first time you run this target, and then we will use that one going forward. And we don't use the live backend, we use mock data instead. So again, it allows you to run in a completely offline scenario. We update the UI5 YAML file. We take out the build tasks from Web IDE, and we add support for our backend proxy. So we proxy the service requests through the backend, and we also proxy the UI5 requests through the backend. And we do this so that we can support multiple different versions of UI5 at runtime. So we found that our developers want to test their application with different versions of UI5, and this allows them to change it seamlessly using targets in VS Code and Business Application Studio. Finally, we also support live reload of your application, and this gets added to the YAML file. Okay, just a few more files to talk about. Index.html is just a standard index page without the Fiori Launchpad to allow you to test your application locally. We make one small change to the manifest.json. So in this application, the project ID was coming from Maven, and in our case, the migration tool updates that. A couple of static files we add. One is a changes loader. So that allows us to add SAP UI5 Flex changes that may be in the project and preview them locally. We also add another static file to support live reload of the application, again in preview mode. We provide the FLP sandbox.html. It's already there. We update it to support proxying to our backend. We add support for the changes, the UI5 Flex changes, as mentioned, and we update it to be more best practice, I guess. And the FLP sandbox mock server is a very similar file. The only difference is this one we use for pointing to a mock backend rather than the live backend. And finally, last but by no means least, the other file that we update as part of migration is we add a new location reuse libs file. And what this does is this inspects the manifest for any reuse libraries that may be included in your migrated project. And if so, it checks the backend to see if they're present. And presuming that they are, it will register them with the application on startup. Okay. So they're I guess the 12 files we update as part of migration. So now, in theory, this project should be fully migrated and available for use with our Fiori tools. So what I might do is show you how you can enhance the application using some of the tools that Steffi talked about earlier on. So when I right-click on the project, I now get the ability to choose from some of our tooling because this application has been migrated. So first of all, I'll preview the application. When I click preview, I get a number of scripts. I'm going to just start it normally. And when I say normally, I mean it's starting with the CDN version of UI5 and pointing to the live backend. And I should see my application locally. It's a list report object page. I click go, I should see a list of products, and I can click on an individual product and go to the object page. Okay. So that's the migrated project in action, and now supporting our Fiori tools. I'm using the preview, which supports live reload. Okay, so let's say I want to look at this review section, and I want to add a second object page to maybe detail, drill down into the review postings. So again, if I go back to VS Code, I can right-click in my application, and I can choose Show Page Map. So this will show me a visualization of the pages in my application, along with some global layout settings. I have this object page, which has the product details in it. And I know that I want to add the review postings from this. So I choose the plus icon. I can choose the list of entities, and I'm going to choose the collaborative review post, and I click add. I can see that the console updates because the application is actually reloading in the background. And when I click reload here, I can see I now have an arrow, and I click it and I go to the full details of the review posting. So I've just shown you briefly how you can use the page map to view the list of pages you have in your application, and how you can add new pages to your application using it. Okay, there's one more thing perhaps I might show in the application and how we can update it using our tooling. So we have 3 sections at the top: our facets, technical data, reviews, and sales data. So let's say I want to add a new section, and this section is going to give me details on storage and quantities, and where this item is stored, and how many items I have of it. Okay, so what I can do is I can go back to my project, I can right-click on my application, and I can open the service modeler. And again, as Stephanie mentioned, the service modeler is a tool that can either visualize your backend service or present it in a list format. So right now I've chosen list. I could choose to visualize it in either a compact or expanded mode, but for this case, I'll just do a list. So I know that the object I want to annotate in order to get the new facet is the product type. So I click on that. And then I see a projection, which is the details of that entity along with the properties of it. And I can click on an individual property and see the full details of it. But what I'm interested in here is the ability to see the annotations associated with this projection. Okay, so when I click on this view annotations link, I get presented with a list of the annotations associated with that projection. And I can see that I have the details of my backend annotation here. And I have nothing locally stored. And in order for me to annotate and update this, this particular projection, I need to first copy the annotations locally. So what I might do is I can check, and I know as a developer that it's a facet that I'm dealing with that has those details for the projection. And I can see I have technical data, reviews, and sales data stored in my backend annotation file. So in order for me to edit it, the first thing I need to do is copy it locally. Okay, so by clicking on this icon, I will copy that file locally. And now I'm able to use the power of the annotation LSP to autocomplete and add a new section as needed. Okay, so I'll quickly go in here. I want to add a new section. I'm going to use Control Space for autocomplete, and the annotation LSP analyzes my service and analyzes my metadata and come up with suggestions that it sees are relevant for the context I'm in within that annotation file. And again, it fills out the details that it can see and then goes directly to the annotation path, which is a field I need to fill out. Again, it knows the service I'm in. And in this case, I know I want to use the storage bin for storage details of my application, and I will choose the UI line item for the full details of that storage bin. Okay, a couple of other properties I need to add. I can either add the remaining properties in one go, or I can add them one by one. Let's add them one by one. I will add an ID of storage ID, and then finally I will add a label called storage. Okay, so when I say this, I can see the reload happening in the background, but I do have a yellow underline across a number of strings in my annotations file. So what I can do is I can highlight my mouse over it, and I can see that it's saying to me that I shouldn't be using text directly in my annotation file, and it's best for translation purposes to use an I18N properties file. So it also gives me the ability to do quick fixes. So this isn't just for I18N, but I'm just showing an example of how we can do quick fixes within the annotations file. I click on that quick fix, it tells me what it's going to do. It's going to create a text key and then reference that in the annotation file. So let's click that. And I can see it's updated my annotations file. And instead of the text string, it now has a key, an I18N properties key, which I can now hover over and click into, and I can see the storage value being used in my I18N file. Okay, so again, just handily from best practice point of view or translation point of view, we give you the ability to show warnings or potential problems there may be throughout your application and how you can action them. Okay, so if I quickly go back to my application, it should auto reload, and I have a new section. called storage. And when I click on that, I can see the full details of the storage bin that I added through the annotation runner. Okay, so I'm quickly going to stop sharing and go back to the slides and talk about deployment. We're going to very briefly show how you can potentially deploy the application. So deployment in a production environment would probably be the second path in this screenshot here. It would be where the user pushes code to a code repository. There's a trigger that happens perhaps on merge to master, which builds your application, runs some automation against it. It eventually gets delivered to a QA account for validation and then gets deployed to production. And that is its own CI/CD pipeline. And we're not going to talk about this in any great detail. And in fact, I guess our previous presenters did talk about scenarios like this. I'm going to talk about the scenario where you want to deploy directly from your IDE to perhaps a remote dev account or system. Okay. We provide different options for deployment. We allow you to deploy a single artifact into a number of target systems, but we also allow you to deploy your application as part of a so-called multi-targeted application, or an MTA specifically for Cloud Foundry. And we also provide tools that allow you to add Fiori Launchpad configuration to your application as part of deployment. So there's two steps for deploying apps from SAP Fiori tools. Firstly, we have a target that allows you to add deployment configuration. So the idea would be you would run this, maybe once or twice if you want to change it, but you would define your landscape you want to target for deployment and define it using this deploy config target. We ask you a number of questions, and then based on that, generate the relevant files. And then the npm run deploy command itself will actually do the deployment to the backend system. And the idea would be you may need to do that a number of times during your testing, but your deploy config should stay fairly static throughout the life cycle of your application. Okay, so I'll quickly switch back to sharing my screen. All right. Okay, so here I am back in VS Code, and I want to now run the deploy target so that I can see what's going on. Oops. So npm run deploy config. So when I run this target, the deploy config will check the project that's currently in my workspace and suggest some what it thinks are sensible defaults. So it knows that the service I'm dealing with is an ABAP service. It knows the target system URL within my service. So it knows the system URL that I'm using for my backend. So it suggests this as the target that I want to reach. I will use the default client. Oh, did I check it? And now I'll give it a name. Use the default package. There's no need for a transport request. And if I want, I can add a description. So what it does now is it generates a deploy file, YAML file, which we can use for deployment. And the final step I need to do is to actually run the deployment. When I do that, it takes that YAML file, confirms to me that these are the deployment target configuration I'm going to use. I click yes, then it goes off, and in the background it will deploy, in this case, to the ABAP system. So that should only take a moment, but while it's doing it, I will just briefly show you that we have added a UI deploy YAML file with those deploy details. And as I said, that's maybe something you need to do once or twice during the life cycle of your application. And now I get a URL that I can use. If I copy that and I paste it into my browser, I should be able to see the same application that I enhanced locally now deployed to my backend system. So I'll click go. I'll choose a product. And I can see that I have review postings, and I have a second object page linked off it. And I also have some storage details as well that we added through the annotation MSP. Okay, so just to summarize, hopefully I showed you how you can migrate your project using our Fiori tools. Then just showed you small samples of how you can use those tools to enhance your application and preview it locally. Finally, we added some deployment configuration and then pushed it to a backend for further testing. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing, and I think Stefanie now is going to take over with a really cool demo and some low-code scenarios that we have. So over to you, Stefanie.
Thank you, Ian. So that was a lot of stuff that you showed us in a very short time. And I think it gave a good impression of how powerful SAP Fiori tools really are. Now, if you attended today's keynote, you already got a quick glimpse of the low-code capabilities that we intend to put into our SAP Fiori tools application modeler. And if you were watching the chat, maybe you saw that Sebastian mentioned that this is a labs preview. So this functionality is not generally available. So I've got to tell you that by no means this is a commitment. It's just this current state of planning. Now, when we talk about low code, what we mean is that it shall be possible to create simple apps using a graphical UI instead of writing code by hand or, well, actually by keyboard. And our current planning is that we want to provide the ability to generate XML and CAP-CDS annotations already during app generation and then from an easy-to-use graphical UI. So these capabilities shall be built, as mentioned, in the application modeler. We want to do them only for simple scenarios and only in the OData v4 stack. Then in 2021 at least, we intend to support 3 floor plans, a new one that we call a form. It's essentially an object page that's been optimized for data entry. So it opens directly in edit mode. It doesn't have the collapsible part of the header and no navigation bar. And other than that, it shall support the same content features as the standard object page. Furthermore, also the list report and the object page. Now, the scenario in the demo that I'm going to show you is the creation of a capital expenditure request for new equipment in a company that's striving for increasing its sustainability. So users have to provide not only cost, but also sustainability relevant information, such as energy efficiency. What you're seeing here in my Visual Studio Code is a local CAP project. And while Ian was migrating a project earlier, I will now use the Fiori Tools application generator to generate a project. And I'm going to start it via the command palette. The wizard comes up and we now have a new template here. That's the form entry page, which I choose. And as mentioned, a local CAP project, which is located here in this folder. And it automatically detects the available OData services. I use the entity CapEx, and now this is important for the low-code stuff. So I will automatically add a form to this app, and this form will already contain a certain content, a section and some fields. Now, of course, I need to provide some project attributes. And in my case, I'm also going to use UI5 version 1.90. That's for demo purposes. Of course, it's best practice to always use latest, so you get the latest SAP UI5 updates. Now, before this session, I briefly tested using Zoom and not using Zoom. And unfortunately, the generator takes about twice as long when Zoom is on, especially with video broadcasting. So you need to bear with me for a second here. But already the artifacts are being created. You can see the app here in the folder structure. It's still installing the dependencies. But while it's doing that, I open the annotations file, and you can see there's no annotations in my file as of yet. I have zoomed in a bit, so I hope this is visible. Yeah, let's bear with the generator, actually with my product manager laptop for a minute, because any second now, a bunch of annotations are going to appear here, and that is the annotations for a section, a facet, a field group, and a bunch of fields.
Stefanie, can you zoom in a little bit, please, so we have a larger fonts and larger view?
I can do this a little bit, but not too much, because otherwise you won't see everything on the screen in a second. Okay, let me rearrange just a bit. Okay, so now You can only guess that there's a bunch of annotations here in my annotations file, but you can see some fields were added, a field group was added, etc. Let me close this so we have more screen space. And at the same time, the page editor got launched and CDS Watch got triggered. So let's at first take a look at what my initial preview looks like. And now it opened in the wrong browser. Here we are. Let me start the Sandbox Fiori Launchpad. My app is here, my CapEx app, and it immediately comes up with a bunch of fields. These fields are the fields that are coming from the main entity from my OData service. So find a bit more space. Before I actually take a closer look at the page editor, let me point out what are the other ways of accessing the page editor as well as the preview, and that is via this SAP Fiori Tools view here on the left sidecar. You can start the page editor by clicking on the relevant page, and you can trigger the preview by the context menu. But of course, for me, it's already running, so I'm not doing this. Okay. Let's take a look what I can see in the page editor. I have my section, my form, the fields in the section, and now what I can do is I can rearrange. And sorry, I do need to zoom out a little bit in a minute. Okay, so let's say I can grab the request ID here by the hamburger handle and pull it up, and the auto refresh will rearrange the fields in my preview. Let me do this also for the description, and especially important, the type field here. So you will see the auto refresh doing these updates. It's, as I mentioned, a little bit slower because of all that, because of Zoom using up so much resources. Okay. Let's take a look at the property panel. So I've clicked on one of the fields and now the property panel opens. And the first thing that I can do is I can give it a proper label. So let me call my type field type. And you see the yellow light bulb. Clicking on it allows me to generate a text key in my I18N file so that I'm prepared for internationalization. I could immediately open the I18N file here if I liked. And you could see what's happened. I can also change the restriction, so set the field to mandatory, and the red little asterisk is going to appear any second here next to the type field. Here it is. And now, and this is particularly nice, so Katja in the keynote changed the description field to a text area. Now what I'm doing here is I will add a value help. So there's a source, and there's an entity in my OData source. It's called CapEx type. It already immediately detected the right field for it. I can add the type description to make the value help more meaningful and decide whether I want it as a dropdown or as a standard search and filter value help. And now applying this and waiting for the auto refresh of the preview, my type field is now going to have a drop-down box where I can select the type. Okay, so much for adding some fields. I can also add a new section. So I'm adding, in my case, a form section. In the demo earlier today, in the keynote, we had added a custom section. Again, I was a bit quick. You hopefully saw the yellow light bulb that showed that we can do the translation preparation everywhere. And now I can just simply drag and drop the fields that I want in that new section by grabbing it by the hamburger symbol. Here it is. Let me do this for the other fields that are related to the cost and sustainability real quick so that my form looks nice. Okay, let's use these three. Furthermore, I can also add actions if there's any actions in my OData service. So I have one action that's called calculate return on investment. And here you see it's a live demo. My preview stopped and I just quickly need to re-trigger it. Starting via the Launchpad tile again. And now you can see request, the type is still there with the drop down, the new section with 3 fields in it, and the action to trigger the calculate return on investment. Now, what you can also do is, let me take a step back. We said we will take the low code stuff only so far, right? So simple scenarios with low code, as soon as you need a little bit more advanced stuff, you still might want to add some annotations. So you can jump into the annotation file at any point in time via this edit source code symbol. And I need more space here now. And now I could use my annotation LSP again to annotate the service with, let's say, the currency, so that I get the currency here in my cost field. So I will add a measure ISO currency field to my total cost. Yep, there it is. And I will use the currency code. So saving this and waiting for the auto update, I now will get the field to enter the currency in a separate field, and already with the value help provided. Okay, so much for a quick glimpse of what we can do with low-code capabilities. Not generally available yet, but hopefully soon. With this, I'm at the end of my demo. Ian's shown you a great demo. Gunther, over to you. We'd be ready for some questions.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. Thanks a lot, Ian. And we have a few minutes actually left for questions. And the first one, I think you said a little bit about it. You might have said a little bit about it already. Is migration from Web IDE to VS Code or Business Application Studio supported also for freestyle SAP UI5 applications as well?
Yes, it is. Yeah. So Fiori application, SAP Fiori Elements applications V2 and V4, and also SAP UI5 freestyle applications can both be migrated using our migration tool. Correct.
Okay, the next one. Does the application generator also generate libraries?
Not currently. I already mentioned that if you already have libraries available in your manifest file, that we support the ability to inspect those at runtime and then see if they're available in the back end and register them with your application. Soon we'll allow you to easily run the application with libraries that are in your local workspace, which is the next step along that process that we're doing. And hopefully we plan to enhance it further from there.
All right. And then another highly rated one. Are there any alignments? It concerns AppGyver. Are there any alignments between UI5 development and product teams and the AppGyver teams to get guidance on different use cases, scenarios, technology decisions, and so on? Do you know anything about that?
Yes, of course, we're talking to the AppGyver colleagues, but it's a bit early to talk about this. I suggest stay tuned for TechEd this year, and latest by TechEd, you will hear more about this topic.
And another one, where should the ADT-based Fiori Elements development take place? I have the problem that I cannot find various CDS annotations, such as side effects in the ABAP backend as a UI annotation. To do this, I have to expand the local app annotation, for example, in Business Application Studio.
Yeah, so this is a question we get quite often. It goes into the topic of recommending to use what local annotations versus ABAP CDS annotations. So ABAP CDS annotations have a lot of advantages, but they also have the drawback that sometimes they lag behind what we are already offering as capabilities for the local annotations in XML. If you're interested to discuss this topic a bit more, I think this goes beyond the time that we have available here. Join us in Gathertown in the Meet the Experts session, and I'll be happy to deep dive on that topic a bit with you, and we can discuss it there.
Right. And another question, will migration tools support Neo to Cloud Foundry migration?
It does, yes, as far as I know.
I think we're through with the questions, more or less. So that means thanks a lot.